Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Let's say you had deep animus against the United States. Let's say you hated the country and you wanted to permanently knock the U.S. from its perch as the preeminent world power and then degrade and humiliate America for good. You might use Afghanistan to do that, and if you wanted to, here's what you might do. First, you would delay your withdrawal from Afghanistan for 19 years, long after there was any national security justification for being there. You would turn a war into a welfare program, and you would turn your military into an NGO. That would humiliate everyone involved. You would spend trillions of dollars to do this, but you would be absolutely certain to get nothing in return for that money, apart from dramatically increasing local corruption and making opium poppies the national crop. As the occupying power, you would run Afghanistan so badly, with such unbelievable stupidity and overbearing arrogance, that by the end, much of the population would yearn for the return of brutal religious extremists. Then when it was finally time to go, you would ignore the relevant details of the withdrawal. You wouldn't plan your exit, you would just hope for the best. What could go wrong in a country controlled by the Taliban? When crowds of desperate people showed up, as they inevitably would, begging to be evacuated, you'd be certain to give preference to the foreign nationals, the ones who might hate you and prefer Sharia law to democracy. They would get the first seats on the plane. As for your own citizens, the people you exist to protect, well, you just wish them luck and leave them behind. You wouldn't even bother to get all of their names because really, who cares? Then, having done all of that, you would go on television back in your own country to brag about what an amazing job you'd done. You'd call yourself a hero. You'd compare your evacuation of Kabul to the Berlin airlift. And that way, once you'd done that, the rest of the world would know you're not simply incompetent and weak, but you're also delusional. You are a lunatic with no self-respect. Having learned all that, your enemies just might conclude that now is the perfect time to take advantage of your diminished condition. And today in Kabul, they did just that. A terror bombing at the airport killed 90 people and injured 150 more. 13 of the dead were American servicemen, 12 Marines, and a Navy corpsman. For the U.S. military, it was the single deadliest day in Afghanistan in a decade. It was a tragedy, and we saw it on television. In moments like this, Americans turn instinctively to their president for perspective and leadership. It doesn't matter if they voted for him. They want to be reassured by the man in charge. But Joe Biden did not reassure them. He didn't even appear. For hours, Biden remained hidden and silent. Finally, the White House announced that Joe Biden would speak to the country at 5 p.m. this afternoon. But even then, he didn't show. Joe Biden was fully 25 minutes late to the podium, like he had better things to do. And when he spoke, it was hard to believe this is the man in charge of our country. Joe Biden is fading before our eyes. He began by muttering something irrelevant and weird about his late son, Beau, whom he described as the U.S. attorney in Kosovo, as if that position exists. And then Biden pledged, his voice weak and halting, speaking at a pace half of what a normal person speaks at, that he was going to somehow hunt down and punish the people who killed our Marines today. And all of a sudden, this didn't sound a lot like a withdrawal from Afghanistan at all.
To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this: we will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
No, you won't, unfortunately. The tragedy today was not a complete surprise. There was intelligence suggesting it might happen. Just hours before the attack, the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, which now operates from the airport, sent out the following alert. Quote, because of security threats outside the gates of Kabul airport, we're advising U.S. citizens to avoid traveling to the airport and to avoid airport gates at this time. U.S. citizens who are at the Abbey Gate, the East Gate, or the North Gate now should leave immediately. Well, that turned out to be relevant intelligence. What did the Pentagon do with it? Well, not much, apparently. They were too busy tweeting about equity. This morning, the Sergeant Major of the Army, a man called Michael Grinston, wrote this, quote, Women's Equality Day reminds us we're smarter and more lethal when we come together as an inclusive, cohesive team. Okay, so some large but as yet still unknown number of American citizens are trapped in Afghanistan tonight, all of them facing potential death. And here we have the senior NCO in the United States Army celebrating Women's Equity Day, whatever that is. Send in the pregnant fighter pilots. It's also humiliating. Serious people are laughing at us, which is probably the point of doing it. On the other hand, Joe Biden doesn't really need the U.S. military to protect the Kabul airport because the Taliban now have that covered. General Kenneth McKenzie explained this today at a press conference.
It was a failure by, the Taliban operate with varying degrees of competence. Some of those guys are very scrupulously good. Some of them are not.
Now, some of those Taliban guys are very scrupulously good. That was the official word from the Biden administration. Keep in mind what you just heard from the general. He said after the Taliban let a suicide bomber through a checkpoint at the airport that killed 13 Americans. But still, we're going to trust them. The Biden administration trusts the Taliban enough tonight, apparently, to share classified intelligence with them. Again, here's General McKenzie.
The other thing we do is we share versions of this information with the Taliban so that they can actually do some searching out there for us. And we believe that some attacks have been thwarted by them. And then we also use the Taliban as a tool to protect us as much as possible. So we share a common purpose. As long as we've kept that common purpose aligned, they've been useful to work with. They've cut some of our security concerns down.
So we now share a common purpose with the Taliban. That's the head of the U.S. military telling us that. So naturally, the Taliban are now in charge of protecting our citizens. Hey, America, meet your new bodyguards. Bad news is they're the Taliban. It's hard to believe any of this is actually happening, or that clip that we displayed is real, but it is happening, and unfortunately, that is a real clip. So what kind of information is the Biden administration now handing over to the Taliban? Well, according to Politico, quote, U.S. officials gave the Taliban a list of names of U.S. citizens, green card holders, and Afghan allies to grant entry into the outer perimeter of the city's airport. Wait, what? We gave the Taliban the names of U.S. citizens in Afghanistan? We don't have special operators anymore? Why are we doing that? Why would we give it to the Taliban? That can't be right. Well, it is right. It's true. The Biden administration handed the Taliban a list of Americans who are still in Afghanistan. Joe Biden all but confirmed that today. Apparently, it makes the Taliban's job easier. The question is, what is that job? That's one of many questions tonight. Joe Kent is a U.S. Army veteran who served in Iraq. He's running to represent Washington State in the Congress. He's definitely one of the good guys. We're honored to have him on our show tonight. Joe Kent, thanks for coming on. You're the first in our lineup this evening, so I'd ask you for your baseline perceptions here. What do you think of what you've seen today?
Well, today's been an absolute tragedy, but unfortunately, I think we're seeing over nearly 2 decades of lies come unraveling. The U.S. military has been saying for nearly 2 decades we've built this Afghan government and this Afghan army, and that they were worthy of the sacrifice of our brave young men and women, and that they would hold. And then we're also seeing the lies of the Biden administration come unfolding as well. There was a hard plan and a deal to get us out by May, but Biden did not want to execute President Trump's plan to get us out by May, the deal that he negotiated from a position of strength. Instead, he wanted to cut a separate deal, his own deal, that gave the Taliban 3 months of prime fighting season time to plan this assault that we're seeing now. And now we are completely at the mercy of the Taliban, and our troops are hostages, essentially. And we are not taking proactive steps to go on the offensive to get our people out of there. We're prioritizing refugees and anyone but Americans. It's an absolute disgrace.
It does seem pretty clear that in a situation like this, obviously it's complex, lots of moving parts. I always give people the benefit of the doubt to some extent because, it's hard. But any normal person who loved his country would say job one is getting our citizens out. That comes before everything else. There's no question. I mean, any normal person would decide to do that. But they haven't. Why?
No, that's absolutely correct. The only reason that I can think of is just the culture that the Biden administration has set from day one. They opened up our southern border. They're letting thousands of illegal refugees in that way, illegal immigrants pushed in by the cartel. The Biden administration's national security establishment ran by Lloyd Austin, Blinken, Sullivan, all of them. They are part of this culture that believes America is a power in descent and that we are not a unique nation or an important nation. And that culture has echoed throughout the national security apparatus. And now we are prioritizing getting Afghans out of the country. And the only reason that I can think of to get all these unvetted Afghans out as fast as we are trying to get them out is to pump even more refugees into the heartland of this country. That seems to be the top priority of this administration. And again, it's a complete and total disgrace, and it's completely and totally reckless.
So you're part of the despised group that actually fights our wars. You know, working class kid from the Pacific Northwest. You joined young, you got married, your wife was killed fighting one of these wars. I mean, how much of their contempt do you feel personally as you watch them make these decisions?
I feel an incredible amount of contempt and resentment. So my wife was killed about a month after Trump attempted to get our troops out of Syria the first time. Every time that we attempt to end a war, the military-industrial complex fails catastrophically. Under Trump, they double-crossed him and lied every step of the way to leave our troops in harm's way. He tried to get us out of Afghanistan as well. He finally came up with a deal to get us out in May. The military-industrial complex has now lied to President Biden. They did not prepare us to get out right now. According to Biden's timeline, Biden should have never made that deal. He should have had us out in May. And the military-industrial complex should have not lied to a duly elected president. That's President Trump, not President Biden. They shouldn't have lied to either one, and they should have had a plan to get us out. But it's clear that they didn't. I can feel the contempt. The politicians and the military-industrial complex, the unelected bureaucrats, they treat us just as cannon fodder to make their political gains. And we do not have to take that anymore. This is our country, and we need to start taking it back. It's all crumbling apart right now. The illegitimacy of the Biden administration and the illegitimacy of our permanent ruling class.
Man, you're making me upset just hearing those words because they're so clearly true. And I think anyone listening tonight who's lived in this country for the last 20 years knows that what you said is exactly right. And my last question to you, not to increase the level of bitterness here, but there are a lot of people responsible for the debacle that we're seeing now, for the deaths of those 13 Marines, the Navy corpsmen, today. And you wonder if any of them will ever be held accountable for what they did.
They will be held accountable. We are going to take the House and the Senate back in 2022, and we are going to hold a full inquiry on all of our wars, starting with this incident, starting with this botched withdrawal, and essentially working our way backwards. We know that we've been lied to about Afghanistan for years now. The Afghan papers that came out last year that the media ran coverage for, that all started to expose the lies. We know Iraq was based on lies. There will be accountability when we take our country back, and that's why I'm running for Congress, to take this nation back.
Man, we are rooting for you. Joe Kent of Washington State, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Tucker.
Doug McGregor is a retired Army colonel, a former senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense. He's compared the crisis in Afghanistan to the Benghazi disaster under the Obama administration. He joins us tonight. Doug, thanks so much for coming on. How would you assess what you're seeing now, tonight?
Well, you're seeing the lapses in security, the absence of realistic planning, bad leadership from the top, a failure to outline specifically what the goal was, which I think very clearly was to get all of the American citizens and allied citizens out before we withdrew any military power. All of this looks a lot like Benghazi on steroids.
Well, I guess that's, and not to keep repeating it, but I'm going to continue to until I get a real answer. I don't understand why you would withdraw military force before every American who wants to leave has left. Isn't that your duty? Isn't it like the captain abandoning his ship and leaving the passengers to go to the bottom? Like, what is this?
Well, there's no question, Tucker, but I think General McKenzie answered your question. How is this possible? It strikes me that he concocted, and the planners that worked for him, a rosy scenario. Normally, when you operate in this kind of environment, you look at the worst case analysis. You plan for the worst thing the enemy can do to you, and then you backward plan from that.
Right.
Why was our perimeter so close to the Taliban? Why wasn't the Taliban told to stay at least 2,000 or 3,000 meters away from the airfield? We had no standoff. Where was the AC-130 in the air? Why didn't we have some mobile armored firepower on the ground in the form of Bradleys or tanks? You can fly them in and fly them out when you're finished. I don't understand what was going on. It strikes me that no one seemed to think this was really a dangerous environment. The only thing I can conclude is that this half-assed operation was McKenzie's fault primarily, but he's also got the Secretary of Defense. I assume that he briefed him, in which case the Secretary of Defense should be removed. And I know Milley is very unpopular with lots of people, but he's just an advisor. Apparently, he didn't give very good advice. You should clean house. This is reminiscent of what happened to JFK at the Bay of Pigs. He did not immediately clean house, but eventually he had to. I think we're in the same position right now.
Do you think, I mean, this is so humiliating for the United States. I know you had advocated for withdrawal from Afghanistan, so it's not like you're calling for permanent war there. You're on the opposite side. But the way we got out is so damaging to this country on every level that it almost seems like it was on purpose. I'm not a conspiracy person, but how could you do something like this? How could you imagine any other outcome but this?
You know, I think people will say, well, there were people actively trying to present us with a failure. I'm not sure that's the case. I think we look a lot like the British Expeditionary Force at Dunkirk. By the time they reached the Channel, the only thing that saved them at the time was Hitler's decision to halt. Had the Germans continued, they'd have had 250,000 British prisoners. They were saved by a miracle. We can't depend on miracles in Afghanistan. We've got to save ourselves. And we haven't done a very good job of it. So we look feckless. We look incompetent. And I think our French and British allies privately are shaking their heads in disbelief because they've actually handled this much better than we have.
How distressing to hear that. How do you think this will play out from here?
Well, we'll get out, and the Taliban is probably going to do business with the countries around it. How that will turn out, I don't know. But I know that the Indians, the Russians, and the Iranians are all very sensitive to the real threat in the region, which emanates from Pakistan. Right. That's the wellspring of Sunni Islamist terrorism, and the Taliban is funded by them. That's been the problem from day one, and we've never come to terms with that. And here we are 20 years later, $2 trillion in the hole, tens of thousands of wounded and killed, and what do we got for it? Nothing.
Do you think we'll get all the Americans out?
I hope so. I'm sure there are people on the ground there. I know them in the Army and the Marines. People that I knew when I was in active duty would say, we're not leaving until we're certain that every American is out. Now, will they be allowed to do that? Or are they going to be told by the Secretary of Defense and General McKenzie, I'm sorry, you have to leave, it's over? That I don't know. But if you leave it to the soldiers and Marines on the ground over there, hell yes.
Yeah, I believe that. Well, last question. I know that the Biden administration, unfortunately, has not called you for advice. They ought to. But if you were giving advice to the administration right now, what would you tell them to do?
Well, first of all, they need to stick with the withdrawal. But they need to make it a precondition that we will not leave until we have successfully extricated every American citizen. We need to make it clear to the Taliban. If there's any interference, then we will take whatever action is required against them. I don't think that the Taliban is stupid. I think at this point they recognize they've won what they want, and they are liable to go along with it. But at the same time, you can't appear feckless. You can't appear weak. Donald Trump never did that. He was always a voice of strength and influence and power. We need that desperately right now, and that's absent at the top.
Yeah. Get our people out. Amen. Colonel McGregor, thank you so much for that.
Yes, sir.
So in his remarks today, which once again were 25 minutes late because, Joe Biden was busy, the president vowed to, quote, hunt down those responsible for killing 13 Americans today in Kabul. In a matter of days, it seems like we've gone from withdrawing to being pulled back into war. Mitch McConnell, for example, the head Republican in the Senate, just tweeted this. The president needs to clearly and firmly state the United States will stay as long as it takes in Afghanistan. Well, that's an interesting response. You're hearing a lot of that, by the way, unfortunately, from a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill. This proves that we need to stay in Afghanistan. What to make of this? Jesse Kelly's the host of the Jesse Kelly Show. He joins us tonight. Jesse, thanks so much for coming on. You're watching this. What do you think this means? What is going on here exactly?
Politics. No patriotism at all, no love of country at all. This is all politics, Tucker. That's why I'm as full of hate and rage right now as I have been probably since 9/11. I know for a fact either mothers or wives or somebody like that, they're getting a phone call tonight or will be getting a phone call shortly, and they're going to find out husband's never coming home again, daddy's never coming home again, my son's never coming home again, and I know for a fact the scumbags in the White House who run this country, they're sitting around a table as we speak, and they're not worried about mommy, they're not worried about daddy, they're not worried about that kid, they haven't shed a single tear for anybody, they're worried about poll numbers, Tucker, they're worried what polls well, how are we doing with middle-aged women, how do you think we did with black people tonight? How do you think we did? These people disgust me. They disgust me as much as the Taliban disgust me. I'm so grossed out by the people who lead this country. Our warriors deserve so much better.
They certainly do. I got to say, though, it does feel like potentially a turning point. I mean, this reveals such rot underneath. our credentialed class, their claim to power is their expertise. They're good at stuff you're not. What do you know? You're Jesse Kelly, used to sell RVs. Shut up and obey. But they've just revealed that they actually have no idea what they're doing. They can't even withdraw from Afghanistan. So what change do you imagine going forward this will spur?
Absolutely nothing. Tucker, they put Joe Biden in there on purpose. You remember they cleared out the field to put in this old man who's clearly half functional. Instead of dependable, we got depends in the White House. The guy has no idea what he's doing, and the backup plan is Kamala Harris, who quite literally laid down to get the job. These people don't care about country at all. There's no plan, and that's what's amazing right now, Tucker. None of them, not one person, not Lloyd Austin or Milley or any one of these idiots, none of them are looking in the mirror as you and I are talking and saying to themselves, gee, I think I really screwed up. They're all worried about their own rear ends and their pensions and their career, and there's no patriotism anymore, and it makes me want to vomit.
Well, Lloyd Austin, at the height of this 2 days ago, reminded us that the real threat is not the Taliban, it's white supremacy in America. It's Trump voters. Said that out loud.
Oh, yeah, him and Milley. Milley was in front of Congress, you remember, testifying about white rage and how he wants to understand white rage. Well, we're finding out right now what all that's getting us. There are only so many hours in the day. Either you're digging into white rage or you're digging into actually finding a way to exfil your people from Afghanistan without getting American citizens slaughtered, brave Marines slaughtered, our allies slaughtered. This is more than just a national embarrassment. This is an international embarrassment. I can't even imagine what the military planners in China are pouring into the ears of Xi Jinping right now, because I have to be honest, if I were them, I'd be landing on the shores of Taiwan tomorrow knowing we have a half-dead person in the White House.
Yeah, you might, if you lived in Taipei, you might want to be buying lots of Bitcoin and picking up a condo in Santa Monica, I would say, right about now. Jesse Kelly, thank you so much for that. Good to see you. So the U.S. military tells us that an ISIS affiliate in Afghanistan that they are calling ISIS-K was responsible for today's terror attack at the Kabul airport. The K in ISIS-K stands for Khorasan, which is near the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. According to the UN, this group, ISIS-K, has around 22,000 fighters in Afghanistan. So what is this ISIS-K, and how long are we going to stay in Afghanistan to fight them? Jim Hansen served in the U.S. Army Special Forces. He's the president of the Security Studies Group, and we're happy to have him join us tonight. Jim, thanks so much for coming on. ISIS-K, a lot of Americans hadn't heard that phrase till today or yesterday. What is this, and how are we going to respond to it?
Tucker, ISIS-K is a bunch of Taliban guys who thought that the Taliban wasn't savage and barbaric enough for them. So they split off and formed their own group. And I guess if they got in control, rather than just shooting women in the back of the head at the soccer stadium, they might do live beheadings on pay-per-view. They're obviously a menace, and I think we need to go ahead and consider them, the prime threat to U.S. troops on the ground right now. But remember one thing. Joe Biden made a deal with the Taliban to provide security for all of us around that airport. So whoever those ISIS-K suicide bombers who got in today, they had to pass through some Taliban checkpoints to get where they're going. So I don't think the Taliban gets a walk on this. There's blood on their hands as well.
How do you respond to apparently the fact that the Biden administration handed the Taliban a list of Americans still in the country, their names?
Tucker, Biden gave the entire game away to the Taliban. Now, they had him in a very bad position. They told him, if you don't give us what we want, we're going to start fighting again. And the last thing he wanted was any fighting going on, because then the military would win the argument and we would have stayed. So what he did is he made a deal with them in Doha, Qatar, and he said, we'll give you what you want. We'll give you a clear path to Kabul, and you can have the country. We'll ground the Afghan Air Force. We'll shut down Bagram, and we'll let your leader, Mullah Baradar, fly back from Qatar on a C-17 with the back end of it full of Qatari cash. He gave the game away for a lame promise that never got delivered, that they would take care and let Americans get out. They didn't do that. They didn't do anything. Biden got taken to the cleaners, and Americans are dying now.
So what's the point of having what we typically refer to as the most powerful military in the world? I don't know if that's actually true or not, but we say that it's true. What's the point of having a military this well funded, certainly the most expensive, if you have to make deals that include flying back the Taliban leadership with cash from Doha? Like, what is the point of military strength if you have to do that?
The problem is you want military strength as the United States. What you need is political will to use it to deter our enemies because they're scared of the hellfire and damnation you will rain down on them if you cross us. And we don't have that. We've got a doddering, drooling fool as commander-in-chief who is now giving away even worse. You know, he's given away Afghanistan, which we didn't need, but he's given away American credibility and deterrence. So now our enemies aren't scared, tyrants are emboldened, and our allies know they can't trust us. Having a potent military is useless if you don't have the correct people running it and using it properly.
Now, I know you do national security for a living, not politics, but what do you make of the number of prominent Democrats, the other channels, which effectively are arms of the DNC, attacking Joe Biden all of a sudden? They've defended every decision Biden has made, opening the southern border, gas prices, inflation, whatever. It doesn't matter. He could invade Canada. They defend it. But they're attacking him on this. Is that because they're neocons above all? Is it because they want to replace Biden? I mean, do you have any guesses as to what's going on?
They're political tools, Tucker. They're just doing it now because Biden has become a liability. They thought they could put him in and safely hold the White House and get their agenda in play, and now he has become a problem. He's not only screwed up all the political, domestic issues that you mentioned, but now he's made us the one thing Americans won't tolerate: a weak, pathetic-looking thing on the world stage. And that's not something even the Democrats are going to put up with. The problem is they hate Kamala Harris as much as the rest of us do, and they don't want to put her in. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And unfortunately, that's going to hurt the United States as much as it's going to hurt them.
Yeah, I haven't asked her husband. I've never met anybody who likes Kamala Harris. I mean, maybe they're out there. This bias in the American press corps is in favor of war. We're just for war. That's our position. So the very first question that Joe Biden got today, came from NBC News, was essentially, why don't you escalate the war in Afghanistan, the one that we're purportedly withdrawing from, and deploy more troops? It's interesting. So the media, which of course play on the emotions of decent people, and all decent people are highly upset about what's going on right now, are now trying to convince you there's no possible way America can leave Afghanistan after 20 years. Are we misreading that? It seems like that's what's going on. Glenn Greenwald has been paying close attention. He's an independent journalist who writes, as you doubtless know, at Substack. He's made it famous. He joins us tonight. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on. So, look, you can believe that we needed to get out, which I certainly did, immediately, and still think this is a horrible way to do it. But I have to say, watching the press corps in Washington, I don't think they want to get out at all. That's my impression. Is that yours?
Absolutely. I think the comments that your first guest, Joe Kent, made, they usually are, were extremely insightful, because if you notice, he was critical of the plan to withdraw, but he put that into the proper context, which is that it's not like just this last part got messed up. It's been 20 years of ongoing fraud and lies deliberately on the part of the government with both parties, and especially, whatever you want to call it, the deep state, the national security blob, to keep this war going. They lied about Iraq. In the beginning, they lied about the progress that they claimed they were making in Afghanistan, that they know that we weren't. And so I think the key there is that is the political party to which the media is most loyal when it comes to foreign affairs. It's not Democrats or Republicans, both of whom, by the way, have many people wanting to stay as well. It's the military and the CIA. Those are the people with whom the corporate media, the vast majority of them, are most closely aligned, and whose ideology they most aggressively and loyally disseminate.
If you talk to guys like Joe Kent, they're the people, the individuals who are so misused by this system, by the media, by the foreign policy establishment. They're the ones who got killed. His wife was killed. I got to think that's why CNN is being so tough on Joe Biden. I mean, I've never, they even said word one about Joe Biden's inability to think clearly, but all of a sudden they're mad at Joe Biden. Is it that he touched the third rail for them, which is withdrawal?
Look, I mean, I think the key thing we have to remember is there were 3 presidents consecutively, Obama, Trump, and Biden, who all won national elections based on a promise to leave Afghanistan because the majority of the country on an overwhelming bipartisan basis has been done with the war. Obama